The fatal race at Cleveland on the afternoon of September 5, 1949, the atmosphere at Cleveland Municipal Airport was electric yet tense. Over 72,000 spectators held their breath as a heavily customized P-51 Mustang, christened Begin, roared across the sky at speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour. At the controls was Bill Odom, a celebrated aviator famous for his record-breaking 73-hour solo flight around the globe. Despite his prestige, Odom was a novice to the dangerous world of pylon racing. The aircraft, a gift from the legendary Jackie Cochran, had been stripped of its military identity and redesigned for raw velocity. Its radiator had been relocated to the wingtips to streamline the fuselage, transforming a former instrument of war into a sleek, silver racing machine. A moment of absolute horror, the excitement turned to tragedy during the second lap. As Odom attempted to navigate pylon number 3, a fatal miscalculation caused the Mustang to roll violently. For a few agonizing seconds, the aircraft flew inverted before plunging directly into a residential home on West Street in Berea, Ohio. The impact was catastrophic. Odom perished instantly, but the tragedy claimed innocent lives as well. Jean Lear and her 13-month-old son, Craig, who had moved into the house only 4 days prior. The crash didn't just end the race. It effectively shuttered the golden age of air racing in Cleveland. While Cook Cleveland eventually took the trophy in his Corsair, the victory was overshadowed by the grim reality of the disaster. The era of systematic destruction in the wake of the crash, veteran pilots like Cleveland were critical, noting that a long-distance flyer like Odom lacked the specific temperament required for the high-G environment of pylon circuits. This disaster pushed the Mustang into a decade of obscurity, but a greater threat loomed: the scrap heap. Following the conclusion of World War II in 1945, the U.S. military faced a massive surplus of hardware. With over 15,000 Mustangs produced at a staggering rate of 100 per week, the government found it cheaper to destroy the planes than to store them. Across the nation, perfectly functional fighters were being systematically dismantled with torches and crushed by massive steel plates dropped from cranes. A teenager's vow to save history amidst this mechanical carnage stood Ed Maloney, a high school senior with an unwavering passion for flight. Watching the destruction of B-17s and Mustangs at Calero Field was a gut-wrenching experience for him. While others saw scrap metal, Maloney saw the pinnacle of engineering being erased. He began salvaging technical manuals from bonfires and eventually started buying surplus aircraft for as little as $1,500, roughly the cost of a standard used car at the time. This was a fraction of the $51,000 the government had originally paid. Maloney's foresight, combined with the sudden geopolitical shift leading to the Korean War, would eventually ensure that the P-51 Mustang story was far from over. The tactical shift to Korea. By June 1948, the newly independent United States Air Force rebranded the P-51, changing its designation from pursuit to fighter, thus creating the F-51. While the name was new, the airframe remained the same legendary platform that had dominated European skies. When North Korea crossed the 38th parallel in June 1950, the American military faced an immediate crisis. Their cutting-edge jet fighters were ill-suited for the primitive conditions of the Korean peninsula. The F-80 shooting stars burned fuel too quickly and required long, paved runways that simply didn't exist in the war zone. Consequently, the military turned back to the Mustang, pulling hundreds of aircraft out of mothballs and shipping them across the Pacific on a USS Boxer to provide the long-loiter ground support that the jets could not deliver. The perils of low-level combat the war in Korea forced the Mustang into a role it was never designed for: low-altitude ground attack. Pilots like Lieutenant E. Helleth found themselves flying desperate missions against North Korean armor and supply lines. On one notable mission in July 1950, Helleth, flying without a functioning radio, broke formation to single-handedly destroy a tank and several supply trucks before hitchhiking back to his base. However, this mud-moving work was exceptionally dangerous. The Mustang's liquid-cooled Merlin engine, designed for high-altitude escort, possessed a critical vulnerability. A single rifle bullet through the radiator would cause the engine to overheat and seize within seconds, leaving the pilot with almost no time to bail out or find a safe landing spot. The engineering dilemma. The Mustang's designer, Ed Schmud, watched from California with growing concern. He argued that using the P-51 for low-level strafing was essentially a suicide mission. The aircraft was optimized for the thin air at 25,000 feet, where its supercharged engine was peerless. In contrast, the Air Force had mistakenly scrapped the P-47 Thunderbolt, a rugged, air-cooled machine that could absorb significant ground fire and keep flying. Because the Mustang was the only piston engine asset left in significant numbers, it was forced to fill the gap. The statistics were grim. 335 F-51s were lost during the conflict, with the vast majority falling not to enemy aircraft, but to small arms fire from the ground. Survival in a brutal environment conditions on the ground in Korea were as unforgiving as the combat in the air. During the bitter winters, the lack of de-icing equipment made the Mustangs prone to fatal stalls due to wing ice. At forward operating bases, mechanics and pilots lived in primitive tents, sometimes resorting to dangerous improvised heating systems fueled by high-octane gasoline. Despite these hardships, the Mustang became a terror to North Korean troops, who learned to dread the distinct howl of the Merlin engine. By the time the Mustang was finally phased out in favor of F-84 Thunderjets and F-86 Sabres in 1953, it had proven that even in the age of the jet, the piston-powered Warrior was indispensable for the survival of the United Nations front lines. Smuggling the Guardians of Israel as the Mustang faded from American front lines, it found a clandestine rebirth in the Middle East. In 1948, the newly declared State of Israel was fighting for its survival against 5 invading armies. Yet an American arms embargo prevented the legal sale of combat aircraft. To bypass this, Israeli agents and flight engineer Al Schwimmer orchestrated a daring smuggling operation. They purchased 4 P-51 Mustangs and shipped them in massive wooden crates falsely labeled as International Harvester Farm Combines. These tractors arrived in September and were hurriedly assembled in hidden airstrips nestled within orange orchards. Once airborne, these Mustangs became the most formidable fighters in the region, offering a combination of speed and range that no opposing Arab air force could match. Dominating the Middle Eastern skies, the impact of the Mustang on the 1948 War of Independence was immediate and psychological. Before their arrival, British-built Royal Air Force reconnaissance planes, such as the de Havilland Mosquito, flew over Israel with total impunity at high altitudes. This changed on November 20, 1948, when American volunteer pilot Wayne Peake intercepted and downed a Mosquito, sending a clear message that Israeli airspace was no longer open. By the end of the conflict, the Mustangs had secured air superiority, even engaging in successful dogfights against Egyptian fighters. Even after the 1949 ceasefire, the Mustang remained the backbone of Israeli reconnaissance, capable of reaching Cairo or Damascus and returning on a single tank of fuel. The suicidal mission of 1956, the Mustang's most unorthodox mission, occurred during the 1956 Suez Crisis. Israeli intelligence determined that the Egyptian military relied heavily on physical telephone lines stretched across the Sinai Desert for command and control. To paralyze the enemy, a specialized mission was devised. Mustangs would fly at treetop level to physically sever these wires. Initially, the planes were fitted with weighted cables attached to their tails to snag the lines. But when these devices failed, the pilots performed acts of incredible bravery. They flew just feet above the sand, using their spinning propellers and metal wings to slice through the communication cables. This high-risk maneuver successfully blinded Egyptian commanders, allowing Israeli paratroopers to advance with minimal resistance. The transition to civilian speed by the early 1960s, Israel retired its Mustangs in favor of French-built jets, marking the end of the aircraft's primary combat role in the Levant. However, back in the United States, a different kind of evolution was taking place. The surplus market had flooded the civilian sector with cheap, high-performance warboats. For less than the price of a new family sedan, veterans and thrill-seekers could purchase a P-51. This birthed a new era of civilian air racing. Pilots like Paul Mance and Jackie Cochran began pushing the airframes to their absolute limits in the Bendix and Thompson Trophy races. They stripped away armor, smoothed out rivet holes, and tweaked the Merlin engines to achieve speeds that exceeded the aircraft's original wartime specifications. Global service and the last propeller dogfights, while the Mustang became a legend in the West, it remained a vital instrument of war for nations across the globe. From the Philippines to Indonesia and Sweden, the P-51 was the backbone of post-war air power. In the Dominican Republic, these aircraft served for an astonishing 4 decades, eventually facing off against Cuban MiG-21 jets in 1983. However, the Mustang's final combat chapter was written in the 1969 football war between El Salvador and Honduras. In a conflict triggered by a World Cup qualifier, Salvadoran Mustangs clashed with Honduran Corsairs in the dense jungles of Central America. This 100-hour war witnessed the final aerial victories ever recorded between piston engine fighters, marking the definitive end of the propeller-driven combat era. The Reno revival and the power of 3,000 horses as its military career faded. The Mustang found a new home in the Nevada desert. In 1964, the Reno Air Races were established, giving the grounded warboats a reason to fly again. Modern racing Mustangs, with names like Striga and Voodoo, are far removed from their 1944 ancestors. Engineers have pushed the Merlin engines to produce over 3,000 horsepower, nearly double their original wartime output. With clipped wings and streamlined fuselages, these machines now scream across the pylon circuit at speeds exceeding 450 miles per hour. Every September, a new generation of pilots keeps the Mustang's performance envelope alive, proving that the airframe's design was so advanced that its full potential is still being explored 8 decades later. From junk to jewels, the warbird movement, the survival of these machines, is a testament to the vision of preservationists like Ed Maloney. In the 1940s, a Mustang could be bought for $1,500 as scrap metal. By the 1980s, the price reached $100,000. Today, an airworthy P-51 is a high-value asset commanding between $2 million and $5 million. This astronomical rise in value birthed a global restoration industry. Shops in the US, Australia, and Europe now use original blueprints to rebuild wrecks from crash sites. The goal is total authenticity, as seen in aircraft like Sierra Sioux 2, which was restored to its exact 1945 configuration. These are no longer just airplanes. They're flying time capsules, meticulously maintained to preserve the history of the men who flew them. An immortal symbol of aviation, the P-51 Mustang began as a 102-day design miracle to help the British Royal Air Force, but it evolved into a global symbol of resilience. From the high-altitude escort missions over Berlin to its modern-day appearances in films like Top Gun, Maverick, the Mustang has outlived its designers, its original pilots, and the very factories that built it. Its legacy is sustained by a dedicated community of veterans, restorers, and enthusiasts. The howl of the 12-cylinder Merlin engine remains one of the most recognizable sounds in aviation, a defiant roar that refuses to be silenced by the passage of time. As long as there are people who value history and engineering excellence, the Mustang will continue to command the skies.